I'm Alistair Keely. I'm the Head of Media Relations here at the University of York. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what I do at the University of York. I think it'll be applicable to all your organisations and institutions where you come from. Kind of general principles about what we do in the press office here, but I think they're applicable across all areas, really. A little bit about me. I've got some examples of stories, the areas that you guys have been working on. When Giovanna asked me to do this, it was specifically about how do we communicate the science. And she sent me quite a long list of stories of wildlife fertility control. And there's not much science in there. And she was saying, how can we get the science in there? So I'm going to kind of give some, I wouldn't say bad examples, but some examples of media coverage. And then some more kind of positive stories where we talk about the science. And then some kind of top tips, really, on what you can do when you go back to your institutions to communicate the science. So just a little bit about what I do and me. So I'm a former journalist, poacher turned gamekeeper, to use the wildlife analogy. Mainly print, but a little bit of broadcast for 16 years. Don't have a scientific background, but I think that's in some ways an advantage. I have to be able to explain in layman's terms, non-technical terms, what you guys do. If I don't get it, the reader's not going to get it. I'll come on to that. Some of the journalists do have a scientific background, and that can be useful. But I don't have a scientific background. I work here at the University of York, the press office, very small team. And our main focus is promoting the research of the university. I have another role, which is kind of at the bottom, crisis comms, reputation management. That's the bad stuff. Not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about the good stuff, the research. We're the first point of contact for journalists, looking for experts on a range of subjects across arts and humanities, social sciences, and the sciences. A real focus is on the research. We're a research-intensive university. Going on to that, so we have a civic responsibility to talk about what we're doing here. We're a research-intensive university, part of the Russell Group. You'll often hear our Vice-Chancellor talking about a university for public good. So we do this amazing research, but what are we doing with it? Who are we telling? Why are we telling it? You may have different reasons for why you want to communicate your research. There might be personal reputation, institutional. There's anecdotal evidence that it attracts students and extra funding. We've done lots of stories where off the back of it, funders have got in touch and said, oh, I've seen that, that's interesting, I want to work with you guys. The same as students, they've phoned up or emailed. I saw a piece in the Guardian, on the BBC, can I come to the university and do that? So there's anecdotal evidence that it can lead to extra funding, attract students. And possibly the most important bit, I don't know, you may have your own reasons, you want to change policy, you want to change what we're doing in this area, getting to the hard-to-reach people, the policymakers. And using the media can be a way of doing that. I'm not saying it's the only way, but it can be a route to influencing policymakers. Why are you here? Why am I here? Your area of research, it generates news. It's very newsworthy. There's been stories in the past few days on some of the research that you guys are doing. I'll mention one that Giovanna did last week, which made the news just yesterday. It can be controversial or seen as controversial. I mean, sometimes academics come to me and say, oh, I've got a really controversial piece of research. I'm not sure I want to do something. And immediately my ears prick up. It's controversial, the media are going to be interested. But there are things you can do to control that message, to not let it run away and the message be misconstrued or taken out of context. There is a perception, it could be seen as unethical or cruel, some of the things that we're doing to do with contraception, controlling animal numbers. There are some people who might see it as unethical or cruel. Lots of stories in media, the narrative about climate change. When I was looking through the agenda over the past few days, I kept on seeing the word conflict. The word kind of conflict kept on coming out as part of the agenda. And there's a conflict between humans and animals. What are we doing to control those populations? It may seem incredibly trivial, but pictures of animals make the news. Images of animals, videos of animals generate huge numbers of hits to the news websites. Whenever we do a story which has got animals involved, we can track it and we can see the numbers, the people viewing it go up quite significantly. And the media like that because they'll put it on social media, they'll tweet about it, they will put it on, they'll put videos on there, and it will go back to their websites, and they will generate more traffic to their websites. And at the end of the day, that is what it's all about. They want people to go to their news sites. And still, animal rights activists are still very active, very vocal in the media. It gives the media an alternative view to the science. It goes back to my first point. Is it controversial? The media like controversy. They like debate. It creates more stories, follow-up stories if there's people talking about it, not just immediately, but in the following days and weeks. Controversy is what the media are really interested in. So I'm just going to go through some of the stories that I've made recently. I've just got 3 examples where really there's not much science in it. And these are some of the stories that Giovanna sent me. The first one is in the Metro. That's a UK publication. It's a free newspaper. It's distributed at mainly kind of railway stations, bus stations. It has about 1 million circulation figures. So it's quite a good one to get coverage in. This one is from earlier in the year. It's about an issue in New York, rats, big explosion of rats in New York. Previously, they'd used rat poison to try and control the rats, but it led to the death of a much-loved eagle owl, which was well known in New York. Apparently, this owl had got hold of a rat that had eaten the poison and had subsequently died. It created a bit of an outcry. So this story is by the company behind the contraception that they were going to use to try and lace bait to get the rats. But there's not much science in there. The headline, you're thinking, what is that headline about? So a few years previously, there'd been a video of a rat eating a piece of pizza. It scurried off down the road, and somebody had videoed it. They put it on social media, and it created a huge story about this rat in New York. It had gone viral, literally. So the person who's quoted from the company references, and the media immediately seized upon it. They used a video of the rat scurrying down the street. So there's not much science, but there's other elements, more emotive elements, which made it attractive to the media. This one is in America. The headline says it all, Apocalypse Sow. This is about domestic pigs which are bred with wild boars. And there's been, again, a huge explosion in population numbers, predominantly in Texas, but in other states in America. And the media, well, you can see the headline, loved it because there's a villain here, and it's the hog, it's the pig. So they built up the story about the villain. Again, not much science in there. They compared the wild boar to rampaging, drunken teenagers. It's all about creating a story, a villain, and the villain is, in this case, the feral hog. Again, not much science in there. There were other articles related to this, which made in the farming press in the US, where there is a bit more science in there. They talk about why the numbers of feral hogs have exploded. But on this occasion, this was very much the villain was the pig. And this is back in the UK. So this is a story in the Daily Mail. The good old red squirrel. It's an iconic animal in the UK, and there's been lots and lots of stories about trying to control numbers of grey squirrels and boost the population of red squirrels. This is made in the Daily Mail, particularly for the main reason that the King Charles is very much a fan of the red squirrel. When I was reading this story, there's very little science in it. It was quite hard to understand what it was about. And in essence, it was about using contraceptive, they used Nutella and they'd lace bait with Nutella, which was the contraceptive. But there's very little of that in the story. It was basically all about King Charles, his campaign to promote the red squirrel. Very emotive, but they trivialized quite large sections of the story. So it was picked up by the Daily Mail. It was also covered by The Independent, but also The Guardian, and the section called Past Notes. If you're familiar with The Guardian, the Past Notes is kind of a light-hearted look at stories. It wasn't really a scientific story. It wasn't really a news story. It was more, it was talking about the Britishness of the red squirrel and why the grey squirrel had invaded and putting the red squirrel at risk. So again, not much science in there, but an emotive story linked to King Charles. Anything to do with King Charles. If it's to do with red squirrels, they're going to run the story. Again, that was from last year. So, what can you do to take back control? How can you get your science into those stories? So although this is not directly connected to wildlife fertility, it's just an example of how you can talk about the science and get the science in the story. This is to do with the pox virus in red squirrels and what scientists were trying to do to investigate it and look at why it was spreading through red squirrels. So this was a collaboration between the University of Liverpool and the National Trust about what they were doing, what the scientists were doing. And this was very much, the University of Liverpool worked with just one outlet, the BBC news outlet, and I'll come on to why that's important in a minute. But the National Trust were very concerned about animal rights on site. They were very hesitant about doing the story. But eventually, the University of Liverpool went with the BBC News and a trusted science correspondent who had a background in science, who'd covered these type of stories before, and we gave it to them as an exclusive. And it worked. I probably haven't got enough time. There's a video there I was hoping to show, but it's an example where if you just use one journalist, one platform, you can get your message across, you can get your science across. If I had time, I would show you the video. I might have, well, probably I haven't got enough time, unfortunately. But the beauty of the BBC is it's got multiple platforms. You've got it online, you've got radio, you've got TV, you've got social media. They're trusted, they're respected. There was a survey, I think, out yesterday showing that trust in news had gone down, but trust in the BBC was still very high. So it's a trusted organisation. If you work with the BBC, you're much more likely to have control of your message, and people are much more likely to trust that message. This was with the print media, so this was with Giovanna fairly recently. So this was with the science editor at The Observer. Again, we invited the journalist up to York to meet Giovanna. She was able to sit down with him, not just talk about the science, but about her background, about her motivation, about why she was doing this. It was a much more feature-led story. It wasn't just a news story. We had much more control over the messaging, over the science, of why we were doing this, the motivation behind why we were doing this science. And Robin McKee is slightly unusual in that he will allow you to fact-check your story. So most journalists will say, no, you have your interview, they go off, they write the story, that's it. With Robin, he'll allow you to fact-check what you've interviewed and what he's written, which is slightly unusual. So that was, it was about wild boars again, but I think Giovanna was able to talk more broadly about the whole issue of wildlife fertility control, not just about wild boars. And just recently, we worked with the Science Media Centre. Again, Giovanna, with one of my colleagues who's here today. The Science Media Centre has been going for quite a while now. They're based in London, and they deal primarily in complex, controversial and sensitive science stories. And they hold briefings, normally in London, where you're invited down to London to take part in the briefing with other people who are not connected with the research directly, but other academics, other institutions. You'll go to London, invite the media, and you're able to explain the science behind the research, why you're doing it. It doesn't always necessarily lead to a story, but hopefully it will. And on this occasion it did. So Giovanna did a panel discussion with some journalists, some other academics from the UK. I think the Times attended, The Guardian, Daily Mail. There was an organisation, a media organisation from Germany. And it resulted in we did a press release which we issued at the same time, and it resulted in much more responsible coverage of the research, a kind of a broader piece looking at it. And the key to it is working with the Science Media Centre. So that was on Friday. That's just a very recent one. So, I'm just about on time, and if you have some questions, some top tips, and it may sound obvious, identify your audience. It might not necessarily be a press release. If you don't want to, if you're not interested in kind of widespread appeal, maybe it's not a press release. Maybe it's more a policy briefing that you target at specific organisations or ministers or civil servants. What's the news that we saw earlier with the Nutella and Prince Charles? What's going to kind of get in the way of that story? Have you got the research to back it up? Or is it at the start of your research journey? You might not have the research or the findings to back up what your story is. What visuals do you have? We live in a visual age. Every story you'll see on the internet or online has a very powerful image. It can't be underestimated. And when you're dealing with complex, sensitive, difficult, nuanced research, dealing exclusive. If you do a press release and you send it out to everybody, you have no control over that message. But if you do exclusives, if you sit down with the BBC, literally sit down with the BBC, give them the research, give them the story, the background to it, you have much more control over the messaging. Don't just send it out generally to everybody. Be transparent. If there's any issues in there, any controversy, be upfront with it. Don't try and bury it away. The media will find it. They'll exploit it. As I said earlier, controversy is what they thrive on. And I always say this to academics: you won't always have control over your story. If you're never going to go to a journalist and say, this is the headline, this is the story, this is what I want, you have to accept to some degree you won't have total control over your messaging. But hopefully the benefits outweigh the negatives. And there are organizations like the SMC that can help get that messaging out there, can help get that messaging right and deal in exclusives. Now, Giovanna, before we had this, before I met her last week to discuss what I was talking about, she asked me the question, is all publicity good publicity? No, of course not. If after back off, you've done some media work, a press release, it's gone out there, and off the back of that, you're getting people phoning you up and you're having to defend yourself, defend your reputation, explain the science. Clearly, that's not worked. But if you're able to weave in some of your key messages, okay, you might not be particularly happy with the headline, or some elements of the article might not be quite right. I think you've got to accept that if you can weave in some of those key messages and it sparked debate, it sparked policymakers getting in touch with you, I would say that's job well done. That is good. You're never going to have total control over your message, as we've seen with some of the early articles. But I think some of the benefits do outweigh the negatives in terms of that coverage. I think I'm done.
All right.
Alistair, thank you very much. When you see something that is wrong, either that, because you have been misinterpreted, or it's wrong because whatever came out doesn't have any science behind, does it make sense to send a rebuttal? Or nobody cares, or nobody reads rebuttals?
No, definitely, and when we have that issue, we definitely challenge it. Where there's a factual inaccuracy or it's totally egregious, yes, you should challenge it. You should get that. They should get the facts right. But if it's a slight interpretation, you're not quite happy with how that quote's come out, or okay, that headline is just a little bit, off the mark. Can you live with it? But is it generating that interest? Are you getting people in touch with you? But if you're having to defend yourself and it's distracting from your research, no, you need to challenge it. You need to put. You need to correct it. There are other things you can do. I didn't mention it, but there's a conversation. Some of you may have heard of a conversation that's written by academics. It's much longer form. It's written by you. You sign off on it. And sometimes when we do have that kind of controversy, and people are saying, well, that's not quite right, we will link back to the conversation article and go, well, this is what the academic said. This is the academic's words. So that can be another route that you do. But if it's totally wrong and egregious, yes, you should challenge it, absolutely.
All right.
So congratulations for your talk, and I'm from Italy, and I'm also a researcher, but also a journalist or your colleague. And I would like to know something more about the Science Media Center that you have cited, and how it works, and how it's linked to the university, if
yep.
Yes. Thank you.
So we're a member of the SMC. So we our academics subscribe to their data to their database. So they cover a whole range of issues, but it's predominantly controversial, sensitive, complex science. And they will often put literal call-outs. They'll say, right, we're doing next month we're doing a piece on AI, or we're doing a piece on genetics. Have you got experts in that area? Or there'll be a study that they know is coming out in the coming weeks and months in a prestigious journal. And they'll invite academics down, maybe from York, who've got expertise in that area. Say it's to do with AI. There's a big paper coming out. It's in the Lancet. It's to do with AI and medicine. They'll invite some of our academics down. They'll invite journalists, and they'll explain the science behind it. And it's a very I wouldn't say informal, but it's, no questions are off limits. They'll explain the background, the sensitivities, and then it's to inform and educate. Hopefully it will lead to some coverage. And when that paper comes out, they'll quote those academics. So it's on the controversial, difficult, sensitive subjects. So we sign up to them and we pay them a subscription every year. We're on their database, and every year they'll update their database with new academics who've come forward or who have expertise in that field. So we did it with Giovanna. So they came up a few months ago, just a general chat, meet me, meet the team. They asked me to meet to get some more academics to come and chat to them about their field of expertise. So they'll do those, 2 or 3 times a year. They'll go around different universities. Have you got experts in AI? Have you got experts in genetic modification? Whatever it is. So it's the controversy, it's the difficult, sensitive, nuanced science, and it's the expertise that they're after. But they're really good. They're a real game changer. Real game changer.
There might be other questions, but if I can add to it, my experience with this group of people was very interesting because first they said, we have no idea on how many journalists will turn up, which is interesting, but also it forces you as a researcher to think about where is the story, what's in it for these people that they can, where is the hook to use your language.
Yeah, and I think it made in The Guardian, but I think you've got a piece coming out in The Economist, a more kind of considered piece, and I think Radio 4, Farming Today are going to cover it as well. So it's not always immediate coverage. It can be, several days, weeks later.
Thanks very much for that. I wonder, you focus very much on the media itself, and I guess us giving our message to the media, but a lot of things just sort of go out on social media. To what extent do you think the press release and journalists will remain the main route that we try to disseminate our research rather than directly posting to social media, creating our own content, I suppose, so that you have perhaps more control at the initial stage?
Yeah, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, gosh, I could do a whole session on social media. And I didn't really reference it. It's not particularly my area. We've got a separate team that does it, but it's a really valid point. Again, my only issue with social media is there's so many platforms, it's so diluted, and it can turn quite ugly quite quickly, and you can't have a debate on Twitter, on X, or whatever it's called. That's not the place to have a debate, because it just gets out of hand, it gets nasty. I just don't think social media is the way you can do it. There are platforms you can do it on, videos and explaining it, but I generally, if you don't want to engage in that row, in that ugly bit of it, I'd stay clear of it initially. But there's a whole session you could do on social media and how to engage with it.
All right, we have one more question over here.
Thanks very much. Before being I'm a scientist, but I also trained as a broadcast journalist before my current role. And I think everything you've said is absolutely brilliant and on point. I think there's something to be said for investing properly in organisations, particularly science organisations, in people who can write a proper press release and understand what the media is looking for quickly. Because I know from my experience, I'm looking for something that I can very quickly take, and because obviously you've got stories coming from all over the place. So what would be your top tip for if somebody didn't really have that expertise in-house, how to quickly put together a press release or a piece that's going to get noticed?
If they haven't got a press team, a press officer, if they want to do their own kind of PR, AI, ChatGPT. No, there are things out there that you can use templates, but it's simple storytelling. Academics always say to me, I don't want my research dumbing down. It's not dumbing down. It's simplifying. It's conveying that simple message in lay-friendly terms. And I always say to academics, you're talking to your niece or your mum at home, in the pub or whatever, explaining to them what you do in lay-friendly terms. In terms of distributing it, that is tricky. We might go back to what your colleague was saying earlier about social media. Then you might have to go into social media. If you need a platform, you can't just phone up the BBC. Well, you can, but it's tricky. Maybe social media is the route for that kind of independent platform where you can put it on there, or blog, where you have control over it. That may be a route of doing it. But, most organisations have a press team or some kind of comms facility. It's very unusual now not to have some kind of comms support in an institution.
Sorry, just a quick one. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about how to measure the impact after, you know, that release has gone out, whether it's column inches or, you know, number of hits.
Really good point, and it's really important. I mean, my boss always says to me, it's great getting some pretty headlines in The Guardian or the BBC. What does it mean? What does it lead to? And, you know, it's all about measuring that impact. So I'm talking about earlier about the anecdotal evidence, really, and we do try and collate it, but it's difficult. You know, it's difficult trying to collate all those hits. You can measure retweets, you can measure clicks to your website. That's one kind of quite blunt way of doing it. But we try and get feedback, so we'll go to the academic after we've done a piece of coverage. It's got some really good coverage, and we'll say, what has that led to? And we've got plenty of examples where it's been in The Guardian. People have, you know, companies, funders have phoned up and said, hey, I want to work with you guys, I want to do it. So we kind of collate that. But it is difficult to measure. But you can do the kind of blunt measuring the stats, the clicks, the retweets. But it is a difficult one, and it's largely anecdotal. And again, for our non-UK people, apologies, but there's something called REF, which is a Research Excellence Framework, which is really important for the universities, really important for academics. Measuring the media impact is a pathway to REF. So it's important. So academics themselves need that kind of feedback, need that data, but it is quite a difficult one to collect. You know, but there are some things you can do.